At 68 years old, I never expected to fall in love again. Earl Ray Thompson was charming, kind, and made me feel like a young woman. We met at Lone Star Senior Living in Austin, Texas during bingo night, and within weeks, we were inseparable. But when Earl whispered something during our first kiss, my blood ran cold. He said, "I've been waiting 40 years to tell someone the truth about what happened to Rosa Martinez." My name is Wanda June Hartwell, and this is the story of how a retirement home romance led me to uncover one of Austin's oldest unsolved mysteries, and how the man I was falling in love with held the key to a secret that had destroyed multiple families for 4 decades. The morning I moved into Lone Star Senior Living was one of those oppressively humid September days that remind you why people say Texas has 2 seasons, summer and slightly less summer. The temperature was already pushing 90 degrees at 8 in the morning, and the air felt thick enough to swim through. My daughter Patricia had rented a U-Haul truck, and we'd spent the previous day packing up the house in Round Rock, where I'd lived for 43 years. That house held everything. Memories of raising 3 children, anniversary dinners with Walter, Christmas mornings with grandchildren running down the stairs, and that terrible afternoon when we got the call about our son Tommy's leukemia diagnosis. Every room had a story. Every scratch on the hardwood floors represented a moment in time. Leaving it felt like abandoning a part of myself. But after my hip replacement surgery 6 months earlier, and especially after I'd fallen twice in 3 months, once in the bathroom at 2 in the morning and once on the back porch steps trying to water my tomato plants, Patricia had been relentless in her insistence that I couldn't live alone anymore. She'd shown me brochures for at least a dozen facilities, ranging from sterile medical complexes to luxury communities that cost more per month than my first house. Lone Star Living had been a compromise. It wasn't the cheapest option, but it wasn't outrageously expensive either. The brochures promised independent living with support when you need it, which sounded better than "you're old and can't take care of yourself anymore," even though that's essentially what it meant. The building itself was designed to look like a sprawling Texas ranch house, all one story with wide, covered porches, wooden rocking chairs, and those decorative longhorn skulls that tourists buy but real Texans roll their eyes at. Still, there was something homey about the attempt at charm, even if it felt a bit like a theme park version of Texas living. My apartment, they called them apartments rather than rooms, which I suppose was meant to make us feel less institutionalized, was on the east wing, number 147. It had a small living area, a bedroom, a bathroom with grab bars and a walk-in shower, and a kitchenette with a microwave, mini fridge, and 2-burner stove that I knew I'd probably never use since meals were included in the common dining hall. Patricia helped me arrange my furniture, hang my pictures, and set up my small television. She kept trying to stay cheerful, pointing out the nice view of the gardens and the spacious closet, but I could see the guilt in her eyes. She felt like she was abandoning me, even though I told her 100 times that I understood this was the right decision. "Mom, you're going to love it here," she said, arranging my collection of family photos on the dresser. "There are activities every day, movie nights, live music on Fridays. You'll make friends. You'll be social again." I nodded and smiled because that's what she needed to see. But inside, I felt like I was being put out to pasture. I was 68, not 98. I still had my mind, my humor, and most of my physical capabilities. But I also had to admit that living alone was becoming difficult, and Patricia had her own family to worry about. I couldn't keep expecting her to drive out to Round Rock every time I needed help with something. After Patricia left, with many hugs and promises to visit on Sunday,
I sat in my new living room and cried. Not dramatic sobbing, just quiet tears of loss and fear, and the overwhelming sense that this was the beginning of the end. This was where people came when they were running out of life, and no amount of cheerful paint colors or scheduled activities could change that fundamental truth. I'd been at Lone Star for 3 days before I ventured out to any of the social activities. I'd taken my meals in my room, claiming I was still settling in, but really, I just wasn't ready to face the reality of communal living. I wasn't ready to make small talk with strangers about medications and grandchildren and the good old days. But on that third evening, Patricia called to check on me, and I could hear the worry in her voice when I told her I'd been staying in my room. Mom, you promised you'd try. You promised you'd participate in at least one activity before I came to visit on Sunday.
She was right. I had promised. So that evening, when I saw the flyer under my door announcing bingo and barbecue night in the main recreation hall, I forced myself to shower, put on a decent outfit, pressed slacks and a blouse that didn't scream, "I've given up," and walked down the long corridor toward the sounds of conversation and country music. The recreation hall was larger than I'd expected, with high ceilings, exposed wooden beams, and string lights crisscrossed overhead, giving it the atmosphere of a honky-tonk bar rather than a retirement facility activity room. About 40 residents were scattered around various tables, and I was surprised to see that many of them looked considerably younger and more vital than I'd expected. Sure, there were plenty of walkers and wheelchairs, but there were also people who could have been anywhere. At a restaurant, a community center, a church social. Long tables had been set up along one wall with what looked like a genuine Texas barbecue spread. Brisket, ribs, coleslaw, potato salad, and those little pickles and onions that always accompany good barbecue. The smell alone almost made the whole experience worth it. I just collected my bingo card and a dauber from a cheerful young woman at the check-in table when I heard a voice behind me that would change everything. "That seat's taken, but you're more than welcome to join us at our table if you'd like some company." I turned to find a man who I immediately registered as handsome, even at his age, which I guessed to be early 70s. He was tall, over 6 feet, with a full head of silver hair combed back from his face, bright blue eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled, and a presence that suggested confidence without arrogance. He was wearing pressed Wrangler jeans, a pearl snap Western shirt in a subtle blue plaid, and boots that were so well polished I could see my reflection in them. "I'm Earl Ray Thompson," he said, extending his hand with a smile that felt genuine rather than performative. "But most folks just call me Earl. You must be new here. I know I would have remembered seeing you before." His handshake was firm but not aggressive, and his hand was warm and slightly calloused, suggesting a life of physical work rather than desk jobs. "Wanda Hartwell," I said, finding myself smiling back despite my earlier reluctance to be there. "I moved in 3 days ago." "Well, Miss Wanda, we'd be absolutely honored to have you join us at our table," he said, gesturing toward a round table near the windows where 3 other residents were already seated. "That's Louise over there in the red cardigan. She's from Dallas originally and has opinions about everything. Frank, next to her, is from Houston and spent 30 years as a high school football coach, so be prepared for sports analogies. And Betty Jo at the end is our resident troublemaker. She's from right here in Austin and knows where all the bodies are buried, so to speak." The way he said it, with a slight wink and that easy Texas charm, made me laugh out loud. "Are you always this welcoming to newcomers, or am I special?" "Oh, you're definitely special." And there was something in his tone that wasn't quite flirting, but wasn't entirely innocent either. But I do try to make sure new folks feel welcome. I remember my first week here, about 2 years ago. Felt like being the new kid at school all over again. So now I make it my mission to help people feel comfortable. I followed Earl to the table, and he pulled out a chair for me with old-fashioned courtesy that I hadn't experienced in years. His table mates greeted me warmly, And within minutes, I was caught up in easy conversation about Austin traffic, the best places to get breakfast tacos, and the questionable quality of the facility's coffee. Louise was indeed opinionated, but in a way that was entertaining rather than off-putting. Frank told stories about his coaching days with the kind of enthusiasm that made you understand why he dedicated his life to working with teenagers. Betty Jo had a wicked sense of humor and wasn't afraid to poke fun at the facility's attempts to make everything senior-friendly. But it was Earl who kept drawing my attention. He had a way of including everyone in the conversation, of making each person feel heard and valued. When Louise went on a bit too long about her daughter's divorce, Earl gently steered the conversation to something more positive. When Frank started to repeat a story he'd already told, Earl listened as if hearing it for the first time. And he was funny, genuinely, naturally funny, without trying too hard. When our bingo caller, a sweet young activities coordinator named Melissa, announced the first number with way too much enthusiasm, Earl leaned over and whispered, "I think she might have had 4 espressos before this. That or she's in a witness protection program, and this is her first time around actual humans in 6 months." I had to cover my mouth to keep from laughing out loud. We didn't win at bingo. None of our table did. But it didn't matter. For the first time since moving into Lone Star, I felt something other than resignation and sadness. I felt engaged, amused, and if I was being honest with myself, a little bit attracted to Earl Ray Thompson. After the bingo games ended and people started heading to the barbecue line, Earl asked if I'd like to sit with them for dinner. I agreed without hesitation, which surprised me. I'd come here planning to make a token appearance and then retreat to my room, but now I found myself wanting to stay, wanting to continue this easy conversation with these new people, particularly with Earl. Over plates of surprisingly good brisket and some of the best potato salad I'd had in years, the conversation turned more personal. Louise talked about her late husband, who died 5 years earlier from a heart attack. Frank mentioned his wife was in the memory care wing of the facility, which explained the sadness that sometimes crossed his face. Betty Jo was widowed twice and joked that she was bad luck for husbands. "What about you, Wanda?" Earl asked. "What's your story?" I gave them the abbreviated version. Married to Walter for 45 years before he died from complications of diabetes. 3 children, 6 grandchildren. Lived in the same house in Round Rock for over 4 decades until my hip and my daughter's worrying brought me here. "And you, Earl?" I asked, realizing he hadn't shared much about himself beyond his name. "Married my wife Lorraine when I was 23, he said, and I noticed his voice softened when he said her name. We had 47 years together before cancer took her about 5 years back. We had 1 daughter, Rebecca, but she moved to California after college, and we don't talk much anymore. Some kind of falling out that I still don't fully understand, but that's a story for another time." There was pain in his eyes when he mentioned his daughter, and I felt an instinctive urge to comfort him, which struck me as odd, given that I'd known him for less than 2 hours. "I worked as a civil engineer for the city of Austin for 35 years, he continued, clearly wanting to move past the topic of his daughter. "Retired in 2008, right before the economy went to hell. Lorraine and I had plans. Travel, visit national parks, maybe get an RV and just drive around the country. But then she got sick, and those plans went out the window. After she died, I tried living in our house for a while, but it was too big, too full of memories. So I sold it and moved here about 2 years ago." "Do you like it here?" I asked. He considered the question seriously. "It's not home, but it's become comfortable. The people are good, mostly. The staff genuinely seems to care. And I've found that having a community, even if it's not the community you choose, is better than being alone in a big empty house." Something about the way he said it resonated with me deeply. That was exactly how I'd felt in my Round Rock house after Walter died, surrounded by memories, but utterly alone.
The evening wound down around 9 o'clock, which I learned was the typical schedule at Lone Star. Most residents were early to bed, early to rise types, and the facility seemed to respect that rhythm. Earl walked me back toward my wing, and we discovered we were practically neighbors. He was in room 152, just down the hall from my 147.
"Well, Miss Wanda," he said as we reached my door, "I surely hope you'll join us again tomorrow night. We have a standing dinner table, and we'd love to have you as a regular." "I'd like that," I said, and I meant it. "Good," he said, smiling that smile that made his eyes crinkle. "Sleep well, neighbor." I slept better that night than I had since moving in, and I woke up the next morning actually looking forward to the day ahead rather than dreading it. Over the next few weeks, Earl and I fell into an easy friendship that felt as natural as breathing. We sat together at meals, joined by Louise, Frank, and Betty Jo, and our table became known as the fun table among the other residents. We took walks around the facility's surprisingly extensive gardens, which featured native Texas plants, a small pond with actual turtles, and benches positioned to catch the morning sun. Earl was an excellent walking companion. He didn't rush me when my hip acted up, and he pointed out interesting details I might have missed, a particular bird's nest, the way the light hit the water at a certain time of day, the history of various buildings we could see from the property. We participated in the facility's activities together, movie nights where we'd sit in the back row and whisper commentary like misbehaving teenagers, trivia competitions where Earl's knowledge of civil engineering and my oddly comprehensive memory for 1970s television shows made us an unstoppable team, and live music Friday nights, where a rotating cast of local musicians played everything from classic country to big band jazz. But what I enjoyed most were our quieter moments, sitting on the porch in matching rocking chairs, watching the Austin sunset and talking about everything and nothing. Earl was one of those rare people who could carry on an engaging conversation about serious topics without being heavy, and he could also appreciate comfortable silence without feeling the need to fill every moment with words. He told me about growing up in a small town near Waco, about his father who'd been a mechanic and his mother who'd worked at the local library. He told me about serving in Vietnam, though he didn't go into detail about his experiences there, and I didn't push. He talked about the early days of his marriage to Lorraine, about their struggles to have children, and their joy when Rebecca was finally born after years of trying. I told him about my childhood in San Antonio, about meeting Walter at a church social when I was just 19 and thinking he was the most sophisticated man I'd ever met because he wore a tie and worked at a bank. I told him about our 3 children, Patricia, who was the responsible one, always had been even as a child, Michael, who moved to Denver and called once a month like clockwork, and Tommy, who we lost to leukemia when he was 12. Earl was the first person in years who I felt comfortable talking to about Tommy. Most people, even well-meaning ones, didn't know how to respond to the loss of a child. They'd offer platitudes about God's plan or time healing all wounds, neither of which felt true or helpful. But Earl just listened. And when I cried, which I did, even 36 years after Tommy's death, he simply reached over and held my hand.
The worst thing about losing a child, I told him one evening as we sat on the porch watching the sun go down, is that everyone expects you to move on, to get over it. But you don't get over it. You just learn to carry it differently. No, Earl agreed quietly. You don't get over it. You learn to live with a hole in your heart that never quite heals. There was something in his tone that made me look at him more closely, but before I could ask, he changed the subject to something lighter. About 6 weeks after we had met, I realized that what I was feeling for Earl had moved beyond friendship. It wasn't just that I enjoyed his company or appreciated his kindness. It was something more. something I hadn't felt since the early days of my marriage to Walter. That flutter in my stomach when I saw him, that awareness of his physical presence when he was near, that disappointment when a day went by without spending time together. It was attraction. It was the beginning of love. And it terrified me. I was 68 years old, for God's sakes. I wasn't supposed to feel this way anymore. I was supposed to be past all that, content with my memories and my grandchildren and my quiet life. But here I was, lying in bed at night, thinking about Earl's smile, wondering if he felt the same way, feeling like a teenager with her first crush.
I confided in Betty Jo one afternoon when we were alone in the library. She'd become something of a friend, and I sensed she'd have good advice about this situation. "Oh, honey," she said, setting down the romance novel she'd been reading, "everyone can see you two are falling for each other. The only people who don't seem to know it are you and Earl." "That's ridiculous," I protested, but without much conviction. "We're just friends." "Friends don't look at each other the way you two do," Betty Jo said with a knowing smile. "Friends don't find excuses to sit next to each other at every meal. Friends don't take walks together twice a day, every day, rain or shine." "Even if I do have feelings for him," I said, which I'm not saying I do, "what would be the point? We're too old for romance." Betty Jo laughed outright at that. "Too old? Wanda, there is no age limit on love or companionship or even sex, if that's what you're worried about. Some of the residents here are more active than people half their age, if you know what I mean." I felt my face flush. "Betty Jo, I'm just saying, age doesn't mean you stop being human. It doesn't mean you stop wanting connection and affection and, yes, even physical intimacy. And from what I can see, you and Earl have something special. Don't waste it because you think you're too old to deserve happiness." Her words stuck with me. Was I really going to let fear and societal expectations about what senior citizens should or shouldn't want keep me from pursuing something that felt real and meaningful?
That weekend, Earl asked if I'd like to take a drive with him. He still had his truck, a well-maintained 2015 Ford F-150 in that classic blue that made you think of Texas highways and country songs. He kept it in the facility's parking lot and had permission to take day trips as long as he notified the front desk and was back by dinner. "I'd like to show you something," he said on Friday evening after dinner. "A place that's special to me. We could pack a picnic lunch, make a day of it. If you're comfortable with that, of course." My heart was racing at the invitation, but I tried to keep my voice casual. "That sounds lovely. Where are we going?" "Lake Travis. There's a spot I used to take Lorraine to, back when we were first married. It's beautiful and peaceful, and I think you'd like it." The mention of Lorraine gave me pause. Was this a romantic gesture, or was he just sharing a place that held memories of his late wife? But Betty Jo's words echoed in my head. "Don't waste this because you're afraid." "I'd love to go," I said. We left early Saturday morning, with Earl having packed a cooler with sandwiches from the local deli, homemade potato salad, which he admitted he'd paid Betty Jo to make because his cooking skills ended at scrambled eggs, sweet tea in a big thermos, and pecan pie from a bakery he swore made the best pie in Central Texas. The drive to Lake Travis took about 45 minutes, and we spent it talking and listening to a classic country station that played Willie Nelson and Waylon Jennings and Dolly Parton. Earl had a decent singing voice, and when Always on My Mind came on, he sang along unselfconsciously, and I found myself falling even harder for this man who wasn't afraid to be genuine. The spot he took me to was accessible only by a narrow dirt road that I never would have found on my own. It opened up to a small clearing overlooking the lake, with a few weathered picnic tables and a view that took my breath away. The water sparkled in the October sunlight, and the surrounding hills were covered in that particular shade of green that only comes after Texas summer heat finally breaks.
Lorraine and I used to come here when we were first married, Earl said as he spread out a blanket he'd brought. We couldn't afford fancy dates, so we'd pack sandwiches and spend hours just talking and watching the water. This is before they developed the area, before it became all million-dollar houses and boat docks. It was just wild and beautiful. It's still beautiful, I said, sitting down on the blanket. We unpacked the picnic and spent the afternoon eating, talking, and enjoying the perfect October weather that makes you forgive Texas for its brutal summers. Earl told me more about his work as a civil engineer, about the projects he'd been involved in around Austin, bridges and water treatment facilities and infrastructure improvements that most people never noticed but that kept the city running. I told him about my years as a stay-at-home mother, which I'd never thought of as a career, but which Earl insisted absolutely was. I told him about volunteering at Tommy's school, about being room mother and PTA treasurer, and the person who organized the annual Christmas pageant for 10 straight years.
You built a family and a community, Earl said. That's as important as any bridge I ever designed. More important, actually. Bridges eventually wear out and get replaced, but the impact you had on your children and their children, that lasts forever. No one had ever framed my life that way before, and I felt tears prickling at my eyes. As the afternoon wore on and the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in those impossible shades of orange and pink and purple that Texas does better than anywhere else, the conversation turned more serious. "Wanda," Earl said, and there was something in his tone that made me turn to look at him fully. "I need to tell you something, and I'm not sure how you're going to react." My heart started beating faster. This was it. Either he was going to tell me he had feelings for me, or he was going to tell me that he only saw me as a friend and wanted to make sure I understood that. "Okay," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He took a deep breath, and I could see his hands trembling slightly as he reached over to take mine. "I've developed real feelings for you. I know we're both old enough to know better, and I know we've only known each other for a few weeks, but I can't help how I feel. You make me laugh. You make me think. You make me feel like life still has possibilities instead of just being a slow countdown to the end."
Relief and joy flooded through me. "Earl, I feel the same way. I've been feeling this way for weeks, but didn't know how to tell you." He smiled, that wonderful, crinkly-eyed smile that I'd come to love. "Really? Really?" He leaned toward me slowly, giving me plenty of time to pull away if I wanted to, but I didn't want to. When his lips met mine, it was gentle and sweet and perfect, and I felt like a young woman again, experiencing a first kiss under a Texas sunset. And then he whispered those words that would shatter everything. "I've been waiting 40 years to tell someone the truth about what happened to Rosa Martinez." I pulled back, confused and disoriented. "What? Who's Rosa Martinez?" Earl's face had gone completely pale, and his hands were shaking so badly now that he had to clasp them together. "Oh God, Wanda, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to say that out loud. I've been carrying this for so long, and being with you, feeling close to someone again, it just came out." "Earl, what are you talking about? Who is Rosa Martinez?" He stood up abruptly, pacing at the edge of the blanket like a caged animal. "We should go back. I shouldn't have brought you here. I shouldn't have said anything."
"Earl, stop." I stood up too, reaching for his arm. "You can't just say something like that and then refuse to explain. Who is Rosa Martinez and what happened to her?" He looked at me with eyes full of anguish and relief at the same time, as if he'd been waiting decades to have this conversation, but was terrified of actually having it. And in that moment, I knew whatever he was about to tell me would change everything between us, and there would be no going back. Rosa Martinez was a woman who disappeared in Austin in June of 1984. She was 28 years old, a teacher at Travis Elementary School,
and she vanished without a trace after leaving a summer school program one evening. The police investigated. Her family searched for months. Private investigators were hired. But no one ever found out what happened to her. The case went cold, and eventually, people stopped looking. I remember that case, I said slowly, memories surfacing from nearly 4 decades ago. It was all over the news. The Austin American-Statesman covered it for weeks. They thought maybe her ex-boyfriend had something to do with it, but they never had enough evidence to charge him. The ex-boyfriend didn't do it, Earl said, and there was something in his voice that made my stomach clench with dread. I know he didn't do it because I know what really happened to Rosa Martinez. We stood there in the fading light, the beautiful sunset suddenly feeling ominous rather than romantic. I knew that whatever Earl was about to tell me would fundamentally change our relationship, possibly end it before it had really begun. But I also knew I had to hear it.
"Tell me," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Earl sat back down on the blanket, suddenly looking every one of his 72 years, and then some. His shoulders slumped, and when he spoke, his voice was filled with a pain that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his soul. "Not here. Not now. This isn't the right place for this conversation. But I will tell you, Wanda. I promise I will. I've been carrying this alone for too long, and I think maybe you're the person I've been waiting to tell. I just need a little more time to work up the courage." "Earl, please," he said, and there were tears in his eyes now. "Tomorrow. I'll tell you everything tomorrow. I just need tonight to prepare myself for how this is going to change things between us. Because it will change things, Wanda. Once I tell you what I know, you might not want anything to do with me anymore." We packed up the picnic in heavy silence and drove back to Lone Star Senior Living without speaking. The joyful, romantic atmosphere from earlier in the day had evaporated, replaced by a tension that felt suffocating. When Earl parked his truck in the lot and walked me to my room, he paused at my door. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I'm sorry for ruining what should have been a perfect day. I'm sorry for burdening you with this, but I'm not sorry that I'm finally going to tell the truth. It's been 40 years too long." He kissed my forehead gently, a gesture that felt more like goodbye than good night, and walked down the hall to his own room. I barely slept that night. I lay in my narrow bed in my small room, staring at the ceiling and trying to process what Earl had told me and, more importantly, what he hadn't told me. What did he mean he knew what happened to Rosa Martinez? Had he been involved somehow? Had he witnessed something? Was he protecting someone? And the bigger question that kept me awake, was I falling in love with a man who had somehow been complicit in a woman's disappearance? Or worse? I knew the bare facts of the Rosa Martinez case from the news coverage all those years ago. She'd been a young teacher, well-liked by students and colleagues, no history of drug use or risky behavior. She'd recently ended a relationship with a man. The police had suspected him but could never find evidence. She left Travis Elementary School one evening in mid-June after teaching a summer school class and had simply vanished. Her car was found in the school parking lot, her purse still inside, but no signs of struggle. For months, the Austin community had searched. There were organized volunteer efforts, poster campaigns, press conferences with her tearful family begging for information. But as weeks turned into months and months turned into years, the case went cold. Eventually, it became one of those tragic, unsolved mysteries that a city carries, remembered by those who knew her, occasionally mentioned when discussing Austin's cold cases, but largely faded from public consciousness. And now, 40 years later, Earl Ray Thompson claimed to know what had really happened to her. The next morning, Earl was waiting for me in the dining hall when I came down for breakfast. He looked like he hadn't slept either, with dark circles under his eyes and a haunted expression that made him look older and more fragile than I'd ever seen him.
Can we go somewhere private? He asked without preamble. Maybe the library. No one uses it this early. The facility's library was a small room lined with donated books, mostly romance novels and westerns with a few large print classics nixed in. We settled into 2 chairs in the corner, far from the door, and Earl pulled his chair close to mine so we could talk quietly. Before he spoke, I reached out and took his hand. Whatever you're about to tell me, Earl, I want you to know that I'm listening without judgment. Just tell me the truth. He squeezed my hand gratefully, took a deep breath, and began. In 1984, I was 32 years old. I'd been married to Lorraine for 9 years, and we were living in a small house off South Lamar. I was working as a civil engineer for the city, and life was good. We were young, in love, building our careers, trying to have a baby. Everything seemed perfect. He paused, and I could see him gathering the courage to continue. I had a younger brother named Danny. He was 4 years younger than me, and we'd always been close growing up. He was the charming one, the one who could talk his way into or out of anything. He worked as a mechanic at a shop on Burnett Road, and he was good at it. People liked him. Women especially liked him.
Another pause. Earl's hands were shaking now, and I held them tighter. Danny was dating Rosa Martinez. They'd met at a bar where she'd gone with friends after work one Friday evening. Danny had swept her off her feet with that charm of his, and they'd been together for about 6 months. But Rosa was smart, and she'd started to see through the charm to what was underneath. Danny's jealousy, his possessiveness, his need to control every aspect of her life. She broke up with him, I said quietly. She did, about 3 weeks before she disappeared. And Danny, he didn't take it well. He became obsessed. He'd drive by her apartment at all hours. He'd show up at the school where she taught, claiming he just wanted to talk. He'd call her constantly. In today's terms, he'd be called a stalker. Back then, people just said he was having a hard time letting go. Earl's voice broke, and he had to pause to compose himself. On June 15th, 1984, Danny showed up at my house around 11 o'clock at night. Lorraine had already gone to bed, and I was watching the late news. He was covered in blood, Wanda. His clothes, his hands, his face, covered in blood. And he was completely hysterical, barely making sense. I felt my stomach drop, but I didn't interrupt. He told me he'd gone to Rosa's apartment to try one more time to convince her to take him back. She'd let him in because they'd been together for 6 months, and she didn't feel threatened by him, not really. They'd talked, or he'd tried to talk, and she'd listened, but then she'd told him firmly that it was over, that she never wanted to see him again, that she'd started seeing someone else and was moving on with her life.
And he snapped, I said. He said he didn't mean to hurt her, Earl continued, tears streaming down his face now. He said it was an accident, that he just wanted to make her understand that things got out of control. But Wanda, there was so much blood, so much. He'd beaten her to death. There was no accident about it. He'd killed her in a rage, and then he'd panicked and put her body in the trunk of his car. What did you do? I asked, though part of me didn't want to know the answer. I should have called the police right then, Earl said. That's what I should have done. That would have been the right thing, the only thing. But he was my brother, and he was standing in my living room covered in blood and sobbing and begging me to help him. He said his life was over, that he'd spend the rest of his life in prison, that our parents would never recover from the shame. He begged me to help him fix it. So you helped him, I said, feeling sick. God help me, I did. I told Lorraine I was going out to help Danny with his car. She was asleep and didn't question it. And then Danny and we drove out to a remote area near Bastrop. It was the middle of the night, pitch dark, and we were both operating on pure adrenaline and panic. We buried Rosa's body in the woods, in a spot so remote that I didn't think anyone would ever find it. Earl was sobbing openly now, and I found myself crying too, not just for Rosa Martinez, but for Earl, for the impossible situation his brother had put him in, for the 40 years of guilt he'd been carrying.
After we buried her, we went back to Danny's apartment and cleaned everything: his car, his clothes, the apartment where it happened. We bleached every surface. We burned his bloody clothes in a barrel behind his building. And then I went home to my wife and pretended that nothing had happened, that I'd just been helping my brother with a simple car problem. Did Lorraine ever know? I asked. Never. I carried this secret through 47 years of marriage, and she died never knowing what I'd done. That's another guilt I carry, all those years of lying to the woman I loved. Earl wiped his eyes and continued. A few days later, when Rosa was reported missing, the police started investigating. They questioned her colleagues, her friends, her recent boyfriend, the man she'd started seeing after breaking up with Danny. They questioned that man extensively, but he had an alibi. He'd been at a work conference in Dallas that night with dozens of witnesses. Did they question Danny? Briefly. They'd found out about their relationship through friends, but since she'd broken up with him weeks earlier and he'd supposedly moved on, he wasn't a prime suspect, and I provided him with an alibi. I told the police that Danny had been at my house that evening, that we'd watched a basketball game together, that he'd left around midnight. Lorraine confirmed it because she'd seen him there earlier in the evening before she went to bed.
So the police never knew about Danny. They didn't. The investigation focused on the recent boyfriend, then expanded to include random predators, serial killers passing through the area, anyone who might have targeted Rosa. But they never seriously looked at Danny because of the alibi I provided and because Rosa's body was never found. Without a body, without physical evidence, the case eventually went cold. Earl's voice dropped even lower. Danny never recovered from what he did. He tried to go on with his life, but the guilt destroyed him. He started drinking heavily within months of Rosa's death. He lost his job at the mechanic shop. He went through a series of failed relationships because he couldn't commit to anyone, couldn't trust himself around women. Our parents tried to help him, but they didn't know what they were trying to help him recover from. When did he die? 1997, 13 years after Rosa's death. He drove drunk into a concrete barrier on I-35 going 90 miles an hour. The police ruled it an accident, but I've always wondered if it was suicide, if he finally couldn't live with what he'd done anymore. And you've been carrying the secret alone for 40 years. Every single day, Earl said. It's eaten away at me, Wanda. I thought about going to the police 1,000 times, but I always convinced myself it was too late, that it wouldn't bring Rosa back, that it would only devastate her family all over again to know the truth. I told myself I was protecting them from more pain, but really, I was just protecting myself from the consequences of what I'd done. We sat in silence for a long moment. Earl had released my hands and was staring at the floor, waiting for me to speak, to pass judgment, to tell him I never wanted to see him again. But what I felt was more complicated than simple judgment. Yes, what Earl had done was terrible, helping cover up a murder, lying to the police, letting Rosa's family suffer for decades without answers. All of that was wrong. There's no way around that fact. He nodded, still not looking at me. But, I continued, I also understand that you were put in an impossible situation. Your brother came to you in crisis, covered in blood, and you made a choice that you thought was protecting your family. It was the wrong choice, but I understand why you made it. Earl finally looked up at me. You do? I do. And I can see that you've been punishing yourself for this crime and your role in covering it up for 4 decades. But Earl, you have to understand, this can't continue. Rosa's family deserves to know what happened to her. They deserve to be able to bury her properly, to have closure. I know that now, he said. Meeting you, falling for you,
feeling like I might have a chance at real happiness again, it made me realize I can't move forward with this hanging over me. I can't build something new on a foundation of lies and death. I have to tell the truth.
What are you going to do? I'm going to go to the police, Earl said, his voice becoming stronger and more resolved. I'm going to tell them everything. Where Rosa is buried, what Danny did, what I did to help cover it up. I'll face whatever consequences come from that, and I'll accept them. But Wanda, I needed to tell you first. I needed you to hear it from me and to understand why I did what I did, even though I know it was wrong. When are you going to tell them? Today. This morning. As soon as we're done talking. I can't carry this another day. Would you come with me? I don't expect you to stand by me or continue any kind of relationship with me after this, but I'd like to have a friendly face there when I walk into that police station. I should have said no. Every rational part of my brain told me to walk away from Earl Ray Thompson right then and never look back. He'd helped cover up a murder. He'd lied to police. He'd let a family suffer without answers for 4 decades. But as I looked at his face, at the obvious torment he'd been living with, at the courage it was taking him to finally do the right thing, even though it would cost him everything, I found myself nodding. I'll come with you. But Earl, you need to understand that after this, I don't know if I can continue seeing you romantically. What you did, I need time to process all of this, to figure out how I feel about it.
I understand, he said quietly, and I don't expect anything from you. Just having you there today would be more than I deserve. We went back to our rooms to change into more formal clothes. Earl put on slacks and a button-down shirt, and I chose a conservative dress. We looked like we were going to church rather than a police station, but somehow that felt appropriate. The drive to the Austin Police Department headquarters was quiet. Earl gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white, and I could see his jaw clenching and unclenching as he worked up his courage. I wanted to comfort him, but I wasn't sure how or even if I should. When we arrived, Earl asked the officer at the front desk if he could speak with someone about a cold case. The officer looked skeptical, probably used to conspiracy theorists and attention seekers claiming to have information about unsolved crimes. But he made a call, and within 15 minutes, a detective arrived. Detective Sarah Marino was a woman in her early 40s with intelligent dark eyes, professionally styled black hair pulled back in a low ponytail, and a no-nonsense demeanor that suggested she'd heard plenty of surprising confessions in her career. She led us to a small interview room with gray walls, a metal table, and uncomfortable chairs. Mr. Thompson, I'm Detective Marino with the Cold Case Unit. I understand you have information about an unsolved case? The Rosa Martinez case, Earl said, his voice shaking but determined. From 1984. I know what happened to her, and I know where her body is buried. Detective Moreno's expression changed from professional skepticism to intense interest. She pulled out a recording device, informed Earl that she would be recording the conversation, and asked him to begin from the beginning. Earl told her everything he'd told me. His voice was steady, despite the tears that occasionally ran down his face. He provided specific details, the exact location where they'd buried Rosa, down to GPS coordinates that he'd apparently memorized decades ago. He described the clothes she'd been wearing that night, details that had never been made public. He explained the timeline, the cover-up, the alibi he'd provided. Detective Moreno listened without interrupting, taking notes and occasionally asking clarifying questions. When Earl finished, she leaned back in her chair and studied him for a long moment. Mr. Thompson, do you understand that what you're confessing to is being an accessory after the fact to murder? That's a serious crime, even after 40 years. I understand, Earl said. I'm prepared to face the consequences. Detective Moreno's expression softened slightly. The statute of limitations for accessory after the fact in Texas is 5 years, so technically you can't be prosecuted for helping to cover up this crime. However, if you lied to police or provided false information during the original investigation, that's a different matter. That would be making a false statement to police.
I did lie, Earl admitted. I told investigators that my brother Danny was with me at my house on the evening of June 15, 1984, watching a basketball game. That was false. He was with Rosa, and then he was disposing of her body. Making a false statement to police also has a statute of limitations that has expired, Detective Moreno said. But here's what's going to happen now. We're going to send a forensic team out to the location you described to see if we can recover Ms. Martinez's remains. If we find her body and the evidence supports your story, we'll be able to close this case and finally give the Martinez family the answers they've been seeking for 4 decades. She paused, looking at Earl with an expression that might have been sympathy. Mr. Thompson, I want you to know that what you're doing today, coming forward with this information, even though you can't be prosecuted, even though you're opening yourself up to public judgment and potential civil liability, that takes courage. Many people would have taken the secret to their graves. I almost did, Earl said quietly, but I met someone. He glanced at me, who made me realize that I can't move forward without confronting my past. Rosa's family deserves the truth, even if it comes 40 years too late. Over the next week, the Austin Police Department's forensic team excavated the area Earl had described near Bastrop. It was a major operation. Cadaver dogs, ground-penetrating radar, careful archaeological-style excavation. And they found exactly what Earl had said they would find. Rosa Martinez's remains were buried 3 feet deep in a remote wooded area, exactly where Earl had indicated. Despite 4 decades in the ground, enough remained for positive identification through dental records and DNA comparison with her surviving family members. She was still wearing the jewelry her family remembered, a silver cross necklace her mother had given her, small hoop earrings, a class ring from the University of Texas. The discovery made headlines across Texas. 40-year-old cold case solved after confession, read the Austin American-Statesman. Missing teacher's body found after 4 decades, announced the local news channels. The story had everything that captured public attention. A decades-old mystery, a tragic young victim, a dramatic confession, and the discovery of remains that finally brought closure to a grieving family. Earl became both infamous and somewhat celebrated, depending on who you asked. Some people condemned him for waiting 40 years to come forward, for letting Rosa's family suffer without answers for so long. Online comments were particularly brutal, with people calling him a coward, an accomplice to murder, someone who deserved to rot in prison regardless of statutes of limitations. But others were more sympathetic, understanding that he'd been put in an impossible situation by his brother, and that coming forward now, when he could have easily taken the secret to his grave, showed genuine remorse and courage. At Lone Star Senior Living, the reactions were mixed. Some residents refused to speak to Earl, disgusted that he'd helped cover up a murder and lived among them without anyone knowing his secret. Louise from our dinner table stopped sitting with us, saying she couldn't break bread with someone who'd done what Earl had done. Frank was more understanding, pulling Earl aside one day to tell him that he'd served in Vietnam and understood how impossible situations could lead good people to make terrible choices.
Betty Jo, predictably, had the most nuanced take. "What you did was wrong," she told Earl bluntly one afternoon in the common area. "But you've been punishing yourself for 40 years, and now you've finally given that family closure. That counts for something." As for me, I struggled with my feelings about the entire situation more than I wanted to admit. In the days following Earl's confession to the police, I took some time away from him. I spent more time with my daughter, Patricia, who was concerned about my involvement with the man who'd helped cover up a murder. I talked with my son, Michael, on the phone, who listened thoughtfully and then said, "Mom, only you can decide if this man's past makes him unworthy of your present." I visited my grandchildren and threw myself into their activities,
School plays, soccer games, anything to distract myself from the complicated emotions I was experiencing. But I couldn't stop thinking about Earl, about the tormented look in his eyes when he told me the truth, about the courage it had taken to finally confess after 4 decades of silence, about how he looked in that interview room, accepting full responsibility for his actions without making excuses. 3 weeks after Earl's confession, I received an unexpected visitor. I was in the Lone Star Garden, sitting on my favorite bench with a book I wasn't really reading, when a woman approached me tentatively.
Mrs. Hartwell, she said, I'm Carmen Rodriguez. I was Rosa Martinez's younger sister. I was wondering if I could talk to you for a few minutes. My heart started racing. Of course, I said, gesturing to the bench beside me. Please, sit down. Carmen Rodriguez was in her early 60s now, with the same dark hair and warm brown eyes that Rosa had in all the photos I'd seen in the news. She carried a purse clutched tightly to her chest, and I could see that her hands were shaking slightly. I wanted to thank you, she said, settling onto the bench. Detective Moreno told me that you were with Mr. Thompson when he came to the police station, that you encouraged him to finally tell the truth about what happened to Rosa. I'm not sure I did much, I said. I was just there when he decided to confess. You were more than that, Carmen said, her voice thick with emotion. The detective told me that meeting you, developing feelings for you, made Mr. Thompson realize he couldn't move forward without confronting his past. She said you were the catalyst for him finally doing the right thing. I didn't know what to say to that. It felt strange to be thanked for something that felt so complicated and morally ambiguous. My family has lived with Rosa's disappearance for 40 years. We never knew if she was alive somewhere, maybe with amnesia, unable to come home, or if she'd been kidnapped and taken far away, or if she'd been killed and we just didn't know where. We couldn't mourn her properly because we didn't have a body. We couldn't have closure because we didn't have answers.
She pulled a tissue from her purse and wiped her eyes. My mother died 10 years ago without ever knowing what happened to her daughter. That haunted her until her last breath. My father is still alive. He's 89 now. And when we told him they'd found Rosa's body, he broke down crying. Not just from grief, but from relief. Finally, after 40 years, he knew. He could stop wondering. He could stop imagining all the terrible possibilities. I'm so sorry for your loss, I said, and I meant it deeply. Thank you, Carmen said, but I wanted to come here today to tell you something important. I wanted to tell you that I forgive Earl Thompson for what he did. I stared at her in surprise. I'm angry about what he did, Carmen continued. I'm furious that he let us suffer for 40 years without answers. I'm devastated that my mother died without knowing the truth. But I'm also grateful that he finally came forward, even though he didn't have to, even though he couldn't be prosecuted anymore. That took real courage, and I think it came from a genuine place of remorse. She reached into her purse and pulled out a photograph, handing it to me. It showed a beautiful young woman with long dark hair and a radiant smile, wearing a teacher's badge and surrounded by elementary school children. The children were all smiling up at her with obvious affection. That's Rosa, Carmen said. That was taken about a month before she died. She loved teaching more than anything. She loved those kids. She had so much life ahead of her, and Danny Thompson took that away from her in a fit of jealous rage. That's who I'm angry at. Danny Thompson. He's the one who killed my sister.
But Earl helped cover it up, I said quietly. He did, and that was wrong. But he was 22 years younger then, and his brother came to him in crisis. I can't imagine what that must have been like. having someone you love show up covered in blood, begging for help. I'd like to think I'd have done the right thing and called the police immediately, but I don't know for sure. None of us know how we'd react in a situation like that until we're in it. Carmen looked at me directly, her eyes intense. Detective Moreno mentioned that you and Mr. Thompson had been developing a romantic relationship before his confession. I wanted to come here today to tell you that if you have feelings for him, if you think there might be something real between you, you shouldn't let his past destroy that possibility. He made a terrible mistake 40 years ago, but he's been living with the guilt ever since, and he finally did the right thing. Your sister died because of choices Earl and his brother made, I said. How can you forgive that? Because holding on to anger and refusing forgiveness only hurts me, Carmen said simply. Rose is gone. Nothing can bring her back. But we finally have her body, and we can finally bury her properly. We can finally have a gravestone to visit, a place to bring flowers. We can finally start healing instead of just wondering and suffering.
She stood up to leave, then paused and looked back at me. Life is short, Mrs. Hartwell. Even when you live to be 80 or 90, it's still short. Don't waste whatever time you have left on judgment and condemnation. If Earl Thompson is a good man now, if he treats you well and makes you happy, then that's what matters. The past can't be changed, but the future is still unwritten. After Carmen left, I sat in that garden for hours, thinking about everything she'd said. I thought about Rosa, whose life had been cut so brutally short. I thought about her family, who had suffered for 4 decades without answers. I thought about Danny Thompson, who had killed the woman he claimed to love and then destroyed his own life with guilt and alcohol. And I thought about Earl, who had made a terrible decision at 32 years old and had been living with the consequences every single day since. I thought about Walter, my late husband, and how our 45 years together hadn't been perfect. We'd had fights and disagreements and periods where we barely spoke to each other. He'd made choices I didn't agree with, and I'd made choices that hurt him. But we'd loved each other through all of it, and I'd never regretted choosing him, choosing us, choosing to work through the difficult times. And I realized that love, real love, isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about finding someone whose flaws you can accept, whose past you can understand, even if you can't condone it, whose present makes you happy, even knowing their history. That evening, I knocked on Earl's door. He answered looking tired and older than ever, with gray stubble on his face, suggesting he hadn't been taking care of himself properly. But when he saw me, his face lit up with hope and fear warring in his expression.
"Wanda," he said, "I didn't think I'd see you again." "Can I come in?" I asked. He stepped aside, and I entered his room. It was nearly identical to mine. Same basic furniture, same bland paint on the walls, but personalized with photos of Lorraine and his daughter Rebecca, along with a few framed pictures of what looked like engineering projects he'd worked on over the years. "Carmen Rodriguez came to see me today," I said without preamble. "Rose's sister." Earl's face went pale, and he sat down heavily on his bed. "What did she say?" "She said she forgives you." He looked like I'd physically struck him. His mouth opened, but no sound came out, and tears immediately started streaming down his face. "She shouldn't," he finally managed. "I don't deserve her forgiveness. I let her family suffer for 40 years. "Maybe you don't deserve it," I said, moving to sit beside him on the bed. "What you did was wrong, Earl. Helping your brother cover up Rose's murder, lying to the police, letting her family suffer without answers for 4 decades, all of that was morally and ethically wrong. There's no way around that fact." He nodded, not looking at me. "But," I continued, "you didn't kill Rosa. Your brother did. And you've been punishing yourself for his crime and your complicity in covering it up for 40 years. You've carried this guilt every single day. You've destroyed your peace, your ability to fully connect with people,
probably your relationship with your daughter in ways you haven't even realized. That doesn't make what I did right, Earl said. No, it doesn't. But it also doesn't mean you can't be forgiven. It doesn't mean you don't deserve happiness or love or companionship and whatever time you have left. Earl looked at me with an expression of desperate hope. What are you saying, Wanda? I'm saying that I understand why you did what you did, even though it was wrong. I'm saying that I believe your remorse is genuine and that coming forward took real courage. I'm saying that these past few weeks, being with you, talking with you, falling for you, that's meant something to me, something real and important. You still have feelings for me? His voice was barely a whisper. Even knowing what I did? I do, I said, feeling tears start to flow down my own face now. I'm not saying it's going to be easy. I'm not saying I've completely processed everything or that there won't be difficult moments ahead, but I think we deserve a chance to see where this could go.
Earl squeezed my hand so tightly it almost hurt. I don't deserve you, Wanda June Hartwell. I don't deserve your understanding or your forgiveness or your affection. Probably not, I said with a small, watery smile. But you've got him anyway. So what are you going to do about it? He pulled me into his arms then, and we sat there on his narrow bed in his small room, holding each other and crying for Rosa Martinez, for the years Earl had lost to guilt, for the complicated nature of forgiveness and love and second chances. That was 6 months ago. Since then, Earl and I have continued our relationship, though it's been complicated by the ongoing aftermath of his confession and the media attention that came with it. Rosa Martinez was finally laid to rest in a beautiful funeral service attended by her family, former students who are now in their 40s and 50s, colleagues from Travis Elementary School, and members of the Austin community who had never forgotten her case. Earl was notably and appropriately absent from the service, though he sent an enormous arrangement of white roses, Rosa's favorite flower, according to her sister, with a card that simply read, "I'm sorry, Earl Thompson." The story gradually faded from the news cycle, as stories eventually do. There were a few follow-up articles on anniversaries of Rose's death or when true crime podcasts covered the case. But eventually, Austin moved on to newer tragedies and mysteries. Life at Lone Star Senior Living returned to something approaching normal, though Earl and I are still occasionally the subject of whispered conversations and pointed looks from some residents.
Earl has started seeing a therapist, a woman named Dr. Patricia Chen, who specializes in trauma and complicated grief. He goes twice a week, working through 40 years of accumulated guilt, shame, and self-loathing. I've gone with him to a few couple sessions where we work on navigating our relationship, given its unusual and dark foundation. Dr. Chen has helped me understand something important, that Earl's confession and his willingness to face consequences showed genuine remorse and a desire to make amends, even though those amends could never fully address the harm that was done. She's also helped me see that my decision to continue a relationship with Earl doesn't make me complicit in his past actions or mean I condone what he did. It just means I believe in the possibility of redemption and second chances. We take things day by day. Some days are good. We walk around the Lone Star grounds, play bingo on Thursday nights, sit on the porch in rocking chairs, and watch the Austin sunset while holding hands. We laugh together, share stories, make plans for small adventures like visiting the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center or taking a day trip to Fredericksburg. Other days are harder. Earl has periods where the guilt overwhelms him, where he can barely get out of bed, where he questions whether he deserves to be happy at all. On those days, I sit with him and remind him that Rose's family has forgiven him, that he finally did the right thing,
that punishing himself forever doesn't honor Rosa's memory or help anyone heal. We've developed friendships with some of the other Lone Star residents who've been supportive rather than judgmental. Betty Jo remains a close friend to both of us, providing perspective and occasionally telling Earl to stop wallowing when he gets too deep into self-recrimination. Frank has become something of a confidant for Earl, the two of them spending hours talking about guilt, choices made in impossible situations, and how to live with regrets.
Patricia, my daughter, has slowly come to accept my relationship with Earl, though she admitted it took her a while. "Mom," she told me during one of her Sunday visits, "I can't say I'd make the same choice you're making, but I also see that you're happy in a way you haven't been since Dad died. If Earl makes you happy and treats you well, then I support you." Earl's daughter, Rebecca, reached out to him for the first time in years after the news broke about his confession. She'd seen the story online and had called, and they'd had their first real conversation in over a decade. It turned out their falling out years ago had been over something trivial that had been blown out of proportion by stubbornness on both sides. Rebecca said that seeing her father finally tell the truth about something so difficult, even knowing it would bring judgment and consequences, made her realize that life was too short to maintain grudges over nothing. They talk on the phone every week now, and she's planning to visit soon. Earl cries every time they hang up, overwhelmed with gratitude for this unexpected second chance with his daughter. I still think about Rosa Martinez regularly. I've become something of an unofficial keeper of her memory in a strange way. Carmen gave me a copy of that photograph of Rosa with her students, and I keep it on my dresser. I look at it sometimes and try to imagine what kind of person she would have become if she'd lived. Would she have gotten married, had children of her own, become a principal or school administrator? Would she still be teaching, inspiring new generations of students? These are questions that will never be answered because Danny Thompson took those possibilities away from her in a moment of rage and jealousy. And Earl Thompson helped ensure that her family couldn't even begin to heal from that loss for 40 years. But I also know that Earl has spent those 40 years being tortured by what he did, that he finally found the courage to make it right, even though he could have easily taken the secret to his grave, that he's genuinely trying to be a better person, to honor Rosa's memory in the only way he can now, by living with integrity and honesty, by treating the people around him with kindness and respect, by not hiding anymore. Does any of that excuse what he did? No. Does it make him worthy of forgiveness and love? I don't know if I'm qualified to answer that question, but I've decided it's not really my question to answer anyway. What I do know is that Earl makes me laugh. He makes me feel valued and interesting and attractive even at 68. He listens when I talk and remembers the small details of my life, that I prefer my coffee with just a touch of cream, that I worry about my grandson's struggles in school, that I miss my garden from the Round Rock house. I know that he's flawed and damaged and carrying burdens that will never fully go away. But aren't we all carrying something? Don't we all have regrets and choices we wish we could take back and moments we're not proud of? Earl's mistakes were bigger and had more devastating consequences than most people's, but he's also been brave enough to face them, to tell the truth when he could have stayed silent, to accept judgment and consequences even though legally he couldn't be punished.
My name is Wanda June Hartwell, and I'm 68 years old. This is the story of how I never expected to fall in love again. But I did, with a man who was carrying one of Austin's darkest secrets. Together, we're learning that it's never too late to tell the truth, to seek forgiveness, and to try to make whatever amends are possible with the time we have left. Rosa Martinez will never be forgotten, not by her family and not by me. Her story is now part of my story, woven into the complicated tapestry of my relationship with Earl. And in some strange way, I think that's appropriate. Her memory lives on, not just in the hearts of those who loved her, but in the lessons her tragedy has taught all of us about the cost of silence, the power of truth, and the complicated nature of justice and forgiveness. Earl and I are building something together. Not a fairy tale romance, because there's too much pain and death and guilt woven into the fabric of our relationship for it to ever be simple or easy. But it's real, and it's honest, and it's ours. We take walks around the Lone Star grounds every morning, unless Earl's hip or my arthritis is acting up. We've claimed a particular bench in the garden as our bench, and we sit there most afternoons, sometimes talking, sometimes just sitting in comfortable silence and watching the birds at the feeder we convinced the facility to install. On Thursday nights, we play bingo with Betty, Joe, and Frank, and whoever else wants to join our table. We almost never win, but we laugh a lot, and that seems more important. On Friday nights, we listen to live music in the rec hall, usually local musicians playing classic country or jazz, or sometimes surprising us with blues or folk music.
Earl has started a small project that means a lot to both of us. With Carmen Rodriguez's permission and input, he's putting together a scholarship fund for teachers in Rosa's name. He's donated a significant portion of his savings to establish the Rosa Martinez Memorial Scholarship for education majors at the University of Texas. It won't bring Rosa back, and it can't undo what happened to her, but it's Earl's way of honoring her memory and her passion for teaching. Carmen was moved to tears when Earl told her about the scholarship. She hugged him at their meeting, the first time they met in person, and told him that while nothing could ever make up for what happened to Rosa, this was a beautiful way to ensure her legacy lived on. The scholarship will be awarded for the first time next fall, and Earl and I plan to attend the ceremony if we're able. It'll be difficult and emotional, but it also feels important. A tangible way of remembering Rosa not just as a victim, but as the passionate teacher she was. I've learned so much from this experience about forgiveness, about the complexity of human nature, about how people can do terrible things and still be worthy of love and redemption. I've learned that life is messy and people are complicated, and there are very few situations that fit neatly into categories of right and wrong. Earl made a choice 40 years ago that haunted him for decades. He helped his brother cover up a terrible crime, and in doing so, he prolonged the suffering of an entire family. That was wrong, inexcusably wrong. But he's also the man who brings me wildflowers from the garden, who makes sure I take my medications on time and holds my hand during scary movies and laughs at my terrible jokes.
He's the man who finally found the courage to tell the truth, even though it would bring judgment and consequences. He's the man who cries when he talks about Rosa Martinez and the life that was stolen from her. He's the man who is trying every single day to be better than he was, to honor Rosa's memory by living with integrity now. Is that enough? I don't know. But I decided that it's enough for me, for this relationship, for whatever time we have left together. We're both in our late 60s now. We don't have decades stretching out before us. We have years. Maybe a decade or two if we're lucky and our health holds. And I've decided I don't want to spend that time alone, judging Earl for his past,
refusing to see the good in him because of the terrible thing he did decades ago. Instead, I want to spend it living, really living, with someone who makes me laugh and makes me think and makes me feel less alone in this world. I want to sit on our bench in the garden and watch the sunset. I want to hold hands during movies and share secrets and whispers. I want to build new memories that can coexist alongside the painful history that brought us together. The sun is setting now over Lone Star Senior Living, painting the Texas sky in those impossible shades of orange and pink and purple that make you believe in beauty even when the world seems dark. Earl and I are sitting on our bench, his arm around my shoulders, my head resting against his chest where I can hear the steady rhythm of his heartbeat.
"What are you thinking about?" he asks softly. "Everything," I say. "Rosa, Carmen, the scholarship, us, how strange life is." "Strange is one word for it," he agrees. "Complicated is another." "Do you regret telling me?" I ask. "That day at Lake Travis, when you let it slip about Rosa? Do you ever wish you'd kept it to yourself?" Earl is quiet for a long moment, and I can feel him thinking, choosing his words carefully. "No," he finally says. "I don't regret it. If I'd kept it to myself, if I'd never told you or the police, I'd still be carrying that weight alone. I'd still be lying to you every single day, and Rosa's family would still be suffering without answers." He pauses, then continues. "Meeting you made me realize that I couldn't build a future on a foundation of lies. I couldn't ask you to love me, really love me, without knowing the truth about who I am and what I've done. You deserve honesty, even when that honesty is ugly and painful." I squeeze his hand. "Thank you for trusting me with the truth, for believing I could handle it." He admits, "I wasn't sure you could, or that you'd want to after you knew, but you've been stronger and more understanding than I ever could have hoped for." We sit in silence for a while, watching as the sky deepens from orange to purple to that particular shade of blue that comes just before full darkness. Around us, other residents are heading back inside for dinner, their voices carrying across the garden in the evening air.
"Do you think Carmen really has forgiven me?" Earl asks suddenly. "Or was she just being kind?" I think about my conversation with Carmen, about the tears in her eyes and the genuine emotion in her voice. "I think she really has," I say. "I don't think she's forgotten what you did, and I don't think she's excused it. But I think she understands that holding on to anger would only hurt her more, and she's chosen forgiveness instead." "I don't know if I could forgive someone who did what I did," Earl says quietly. "If it had been my sister, my family member who disappeared, and whose body was hidden for 40 years, I don't know if I'd have that kind of grace." "Maybe that's why it's so powerful," I say, "because it's so difficult, because it requires more strength to forgive than to hold on to anger." Earl nods, and I can feel him absorbing this. We've had variations of this conversation many times over the past 6 months, and I suspect we'll continue having it. The guilt and the need for reassurance don't just disappear, even with forgiveness. They're part of Earl now, woven into who he is, and I've accepted that. Betty Jo invited us to dinner at her table tonight. She said Frank is bringing his famous cornbread, and Louise has decided to join us again. I think she's finally ready to let go of her anger. Louise had been the holdout among our original dinner group, the one who'd been most vocal about her disgust at Earl's actions. But Betty Jo had been working on her, gently pointing out that Earl had done the right thing in the end, that holding grudges only made everyone miserable, and that we were all too old to waste time being judgmental.
"I'd like that," Earl says. "I've missed Louise, even when she was being judgmental and difficult." I laugh. "That's Louise's default setting. You know she means well." "I do," Earl agrees.
And I can't blame her for being angry. What I did was anger-worthy. The fact that most people here have been as understanding as they have still surprises me. I think people recognize genuine remorse when they see it, I say, and they recognize courage, too. You could have kept quiet. You could have let the secret die with you, but you chose the harder path. We head inside for dinner, and when we reach the dining hall, Betty Jo waves us over to our old table where Frank and Louise are already seated. Louise looks up as we approach, and I see a moment of hesitation cross her face before she stands and gives Earl a brief hug. "I'm sorry I've been so harsh," she says. "Betty Jo has been lecturing me about forgiveness and compassion, and I decided she's probably right. She usually is, which is extremely annoying." Betty Jo grins. "I'll take annoying but right over pleasant but wrong any day." Earl looks genuinely moved by Louise's gesture. "You had every right to be harsh," he tells her. "What I did was inexcusable. I'm grateful you're willing to give me another chance."
"Well, don't make me regret it," Louise says, but there's warmth in her voice now. "And for the record, that scholarship you're setting up for Rosa Martinez is a beautiful thing. That's the kind of thing that matters." Dinner that evening is one of the best we've had in months. The food is the same mediocre institutional fare we always get, but the company makes all the difference. We laugh and tell stories and argue good-naturedly about everything from politics to the best barbecue in Austin to whether the facility should get a dog for pet therapy. Frank brings out his cornbread, which is indeed famous for good reason, perfectly moist with just a hint of sweetness and those crispy edges that make you fight over corner pieces. Louise has softened enough to tell embarrassing stories about her grandchildren, something she only does when she's in a good mood. Betty Jo keeps us all entertained with running commentary on the other residents, speculating about who's dating whom and which couples are headed for breakups. "See those two over by the window?" Betty Jo says, nodding toward an older couple sitting very close together. "That's Harold and Estelle. They got married last month after dating for 6 weeks. 6 weeks, and they're both in their 80s. Tell me that's not romantic." "Or impulsive," Louise adds, but she's smiling. "At our age, there's not much difference," Frank says wisely. "When you don't know how much time you have left, why waste it being cautious?"
I catch Earl's eye across the table and he smiles at me, and I know we're both thinking the same thing. We didn't waste time being cautious either. Yes, our relationship started under difficult circumstances and has been complicated by Earl's past, but we chose each other anyway. We chose happiness and connection over judgment and isolation. After dinner, Earl and I take one more walk around the gardens before the mosquitoes get too bad. It's become our ritual. Morning walk, afternoon on our bench, evening walk. The structure and routine of it is comforting, something predictable, in a world that has proven to be anything but. "I got a letter today," Earl says as we stroll past the pond where the turtles live, "from a reporter who wants to write a book about the Rosa Martinez case, about my confession and the investigation and how it all came together after 40 years. How do you feel about that?" I ask. "Conflicted," he admits. "Part of me thinks Rosa's story deserves to be told, deserves to be remembered beyond just a few news articles. But another part of me doesn't want to profit from what happened to her, doesn't want to be seen as seeking attention or trying to make myself into some kind of hero." "You should talk to Carmen about it," I suggest. "See how she feels. If she thinks a book would honor Rosa's memory and help other families dealing with cold cases, then maybe it's worth considering. But if she thinks it would be exploitative or painful, then you have your answer." Earl nods. "That's good advice. I'll call her tomorrow." We complete our circuit of the gardens and head back toward our wing of the building. At my door, Earl pauses, as he does every night, to kiss me goodnight. It's sweet and gentle and full of affection, and it still makes my heart flutter like a teenager's.
"I love you, Wanda June Hartwell," he says softly.
Thank you for seeing past my mistakes to the person I'm trying to be. I love you too, Earl Ray Thompson, I reply. And I don't see past your mistakes. I see them, I acknowledge them, and I choose to love you anyway. That's what real love is. He hugs me tightly, and I can feel him trembling slightly. These moments of vulnerability, when Earl lets himself be fully seen and fully loved despite his past, are precious and powerful. Get some rest, I tell him. I'll see you at breakfast. 7 o'clock sharp, he confirms. I'll save you the good table by the window. I watch him walk down the hall to his own room, and I'm struck by how different my life is now compared to 6 months ago. 6 months ago, I was resigned to a quiet, lonely ending to my story. I'd convinced myself that my life was essentially over, that I was just marking time until the inevitable end. But Earl changed that. This complicated, guilt-ridden, brave, kind man showed me that life can surprise you at any age, that it's never too late for new beginnings, and that love can bloom even in the most unexpected and difficult circumstances. Inside my room, I get ready for bed, going through the familiar routine of washing my face, brushing my teeth, taking my evening medications. I look at the photograph of Rosa Martinez that Carmen gave me, studying her young, vibrant face.
I hope this is okay with you, I whispered to the photo. I hope you'd understand why I've chosen to love the man who helped hide your body. I hope you'd see that he's been punished by his own guilt for 40 years and that he finally did the right thing. Of course, the photo doesn't answer. Rosa Martinez's story ended 40 years ago on a June evening when a man who claimed to love her killed her in a jealous rage. Nothing can change that tragedy or bring her back or give her the life she deserved. But maybe in some small way, the fact that her story finally came to light, that her family finally got answers and closure, that a scholarship will be established in her name to help future teachers, maybe that means something. Maybe that's the best kind of justice available when the actual perpetrator is long dead and legal justice is impossible. I climb into bed and turn off the light, and as I drift towards sleep, I think about second chances and forgiveness and the strange paths our lives take. I think about how a retirement home romance exposed a 40-year-old secret and brought closure to a grieving family. I think about how love can exist alongside pain, how redemption is possible even after terrible mistakes, and how it's never too late to tell the truth. The next morning, Earl is waiting for me at breakfast, as promised, sitting at the table by the window with 2 cups of coffee already poured, mine with just a touch of cream, exactly how I like it. He stands when he sees me approaching, that old-fashioned courtesy that I've come to love, and pulls out my chair. "Good morning, beautiful," he says, and I can see in his eyes that he slept better last night. The nightmares that sometimes plague him, dreams of Rosa, of Danny, of that terrible night in 1984, didn't visit him this time.
"Good morning yourself," I reply, settling into my seat and reaching for my coffee. "Did you think any more about the book proposal?" "I did," he says, "and I'm going to call Carmen this morning to discuss it with her. Whatever she wants, that's what I'll do. This isn't my story to control anymore. It's Rosa's story, and her family should have the final say." Betty Jo joins us a few minutes later, followed by Frank and Louise, and our table is complete again. We're a mismatched group, a widow who helped cover up a murder 40 years ago, a widow who loves him anyway, a twice-widowed woman with a wicked sense of humor, a retired football coach whose wife has Alzheimer's, and an opinionated woman from Dallas who's slowly learning the value of compassion over judgment. But we're family now, and the way that communities form among people who are navigating the same stage of life, dealing with similar challenges, and choosing to support each other through the difficulties. "I heard there's going to be a Valentine's Day dance next month," Betty Jo announces. The activities coordinator's going all out. Decorations, a live band, fancy appetizers. Apparently she's trying to make it actually romantic instead of just depressing, which would be a nice change. Will you go with me? Earl asks, turning to me with a smile. To the Valentine's Day dance? Are you asking me to be your Valentine, Earl Ray Thompson?
I suppose I am, he says, if you'll have me, baggage and all. I will, I say, and I mean it with my whole heart, baggage and all. Louise rolls her eyes good-naturedly. You two are sickeningly sweet, you know that. Let them be sweet, Frank says. God knows there's not enough sweetness in the world. Might as well celebrate it when you find it. After breakfast, Earl goes to make his phone call to Carmen while I head to the library for the book club meeting. We're discussing a mystery novel this week, something about a cold case being solved decades later. The irony isn't lost on me. Later that afternoon, Earl finds me on our bench in the garden, and I can tell immediately from his expression that the conversation with Carmen went well. He said she thinks it would be good for other families dealing with cold cases to hear the story, to know that answers are possible even after decades. She wants Rosa to be remembered not just as a victim, but as the passionate teacher she was. That's wonderful, I say. He also said something else, Earl continues, his voice getting emotional. He said that she's grateful I found you, that you've helped me become the kind of person who could finally do the right thing. She said Rosa would have wanted her story to lead to healing rather than just more pain, and that our relationship is part of that healing. I feel tears prickling at my eyes. She's an extraordinary woman. She is, Earl agrees. And so are you, Wanda. You've given me something I never thought I'd have again. Hope. The possibility of happiness. A reason to wake up in the morning that isn't just going through the motions until it's all over. We sit together on our bench, holding hands and watching the birds at the feeder. It's an ordinary moment, the kind that happens dozens of times in any relationship, but it's also extraordinary because of everything that led us to this point, everything we've been through and overcome to arrive at this simple, peaceful afternoon. Do you ever wonder what Rosa would think, I ask, about us, about you confessing, about the scholarship? Earl considers the question seriously. I do wonder. I hope she'd approve of the scholarship. I hope she'd be glad her family finally has answers. As for us, he pauses. I don't know. Maybe she'd be angry that I'm finding happiness after what I did to extend her family's pain. Or maybe she'd understand that carrying guilt forever doesn't honor her memory or help anyone heal. I guess I'll never know. I think she'd want you to live well, I say, to honor her memory by being honest and kind and making the most of whatever time you have left. That seems like the best way to acknowledge what was taken from her. Earl nods, and we fall into a comfortable silence. This is what our relationship has become, moments of deep conversation interspersed with peaceful quiet, difficult discussions balanced by simple pleasures, acknowledgement of the painful past, alongside hope for whatever future we have.
The weeks pass, and life at Lone Star Senior Living continues its predictable rhythm. We have our meals together, our walks, our activities. Earl meets regularly with his therapist, working through layers of guilt and trauma. I join him for some sessions, and we learn how to communicate better, how to support each other through difficult moments, how to build a healthy relationship despite the complicated foundation. Carmen visits us one afternoon in late January. She brings photo albums full of pictures of Rosa, baby photos, school pictures, photos from her college graduation, images of her in her classroom with students. She shares stories about her sister, memories that paint a fuller picture of who Rosa was beyond just the missing teacher or the cold case victim. I want you to know her, Carmen tells us, her finger tracing over a photo of Rosa laughing at a family barbecue. I want you to understand who was lost that night, not just as an abstract concept, but as a real person with dreams and quirks and a terrible sense of humor and a weakness for chocolate chip cookies. We spend hours looking through the albums,
And Earl cries openly as he looks at photos of the vibrant young woman whose death his brother caused and whose body he helped hide. I cry too, mourning this woman I never knew, but whose life has become interwoven with mine in ways I never could have imagined. She wanted to travel, Carmen says, pointing to a photo of Rosa wearing a souvenir T-shirt from the Grand Canyon. This was from a trip she took the summer before she died. She said she wanted to see all 50 states before she turned 40. She only made it to 12.
I'm so sorry, Earl says. And it's perhaps the 1,000th time he said those words, but they never lose their sincerity. I'm so sorry for the life your sister never got to live, and for my role in denying her family closure for so long. Carmen reaches across the table and takes Earl's hand. I know you are, and I know you can't change the past. None of us can, but you changed the present when you came forward, and you're honoring Rosa's memory with the scholarship. That matters. Before she leaves, Carmen gives Earl a small silver cross necklace. This was Rosa's, she explains, the one our mother gave her when she graduated from college. I want you to have it, not as a burden, but as a reminder of who Rosa was, what was lost, and why truth and honesty matter so much. Earl accepts the necklace with trembling hands, and I can see that it means everything to him. This tangible symbol of forgiveness, this physical reminder of the woman whose secret he carried for 40 years. That night, as Earl and I sit on the porch watching the sunset, he's wearing the necklace outside his shirt where everyone can see it. I'm going to wear this every day, he tells me, so I never forget, so I never take for granted the second chance I've been given. Rosa would approve, I say, and somehow I know it's true.
The Valentine's Day dance arrives, and Earl and I dress up for the occasion. He wears a suit he's had since his engineering days. It's a bit loose now after the weight he's lost from stress, but he still looks handsome and distinguished. I wear a dress that Patricia helped me pick out, something in a deep burgundy that makes me feel elegant rather than old. When Earl sees me, his face lights up. Wanda Jude Hartwell, you are absolutely stunning. Flattery will get you everywhere, Earl Ray Thompson. The rec hall has been transformed. The activities coordinator has outdone herself with red and pink decorations, twinkling lights, and tables with actual tablecloths and flowers. A local band is playing classic love songs from the 50s and 60s, and there's a real dance floor where several couples are already swaying. Earl leads me onto the dance floor as the band starts playing At Last by Etta James. He pulls me close and we move together slowly, our bodies remembering rhythms from decades of other dances at other times in our lives. I never thought I'd be here, Earl whispers in my ear, dancing with a beautiful woman, feeling happy, having a second chance at love. I thought I'd carry that secret to my grave and die alone with my guilt. But you didn't, I reminded him. You chose truth over silence. You chose courage over cowardice. You chose to honor Rosa's memory by finally telling the truth, even though it cost you your peace and exposed you to judgment.
I chose you, he corrects gently. Or rather, you chose me, despite knowing the worst thing I've ever done. That's what gave me the strength to do the right thing. We dance for several songs, and around us other couples are doing the same. I see Betty Jo dancing with Frank, both of them grinning. I see Louise actually laughing with a man I don't recognize, some new resident she's been secretly interested in. I see Harold and Estelle, the couple who got married after 6 weeks, dancing with the easy intimacy of people who've decided that time is too precious to waste. We're all old here at Lone Star Senior Living. We all have regrets and losses and pasts that haunt us, but we're also still alive, still capable of joy and connection and love. We're still writing our stories, even if we're near the end of the final chapter.
When the band takes a break, Earl and I step outside for some fresh air. The February night is cool, but not cold, and the sky is clear enough to see stars despite the city lights. "Make a wish," Earl says, pointing to what might be a shooting star or might just be an airplane. I close my eyes and wish for time, more years with Earl, more mornings having coffee together, more walks in the garden, more quiet moments on our bench. When I open my eyes, Earl is watching me with such tenderness that I feel my breath catch. "What did you wish for?" he asks. "More of this," I say simply. "More of us." "That's my wish too," he says. And he kisses me there under the Texas stars. And in that moment, everything else falls away. The past, the guilt, the complicated history that brought us together. There's only now, only us, only this imperfect, beautiful, hard-won love.
My name is Wanda June Hartwell. I'm 68 years old, and I never expected to fall in love again. But I did, with a man who was carrying one of Austin's darkest secrets. Together, we've learned that it's never too late to tell the truth, to seek forgiveness, and to choose love even when it's complicated and difficult and comes with baggage that can never be fully left behind. Rosa Martinez's story has a different ending now. Not the happy ending she deserved. Nothing can give her back the life that was stolen from her. But an ending that brings closure and honesty and remembrance. Her family can grieve properly now. Her memory is honored through the scholarship that will help future teachers. And her story has become part of our story, a reminder that truth matters, that justice matters, and that forgiveness is possible, even when it seems impossible. This is not a simple love story. It's messy and complicated and built on a foundation of tragedy and guilt and 4 decades of silence. But it's real, and it's honest, and it's taught me more about the complexity of human nature, the possibility of redemption, and the power of second chances than I ever could have imagined. Earl and I don't know how many more years we have together. Maybe 5, maybe 10, maybe 20 if we're incredibly fortunate. But however much time we have, we're gonna spend it living fully. Not ignoring the past, but not letting it define our present either.
We're going to keep having breakfast at our table by the window. We're going to keep taking walks in the garden and sitting on our bench. We're going to keep dancing at the monthly events and playing bingo on Thursday nights. We're going to keep building memories and sharing stories and loving each other, despite and because of everything we've been through. And every day, Earl will wear Rosa Martinez's cross necklace as a reminder of what was lost, what was hidden, and what was finally brought to light. Every day, we'll honor her memory by living with honesty and integrity and compassion. Because in the end, that's all any of us can do. Acknowledge our mistakes, make what amends we can, and try to be better than we were. Earl made a terrible choice 40 years ago, but he's made better choices since. He chose truth over silence. He chose courage over cowardice. He chose to honor Rosa's memory by finally doing the right thing, even when it was hard, even when it cost him his peace and his privacy and exposed him to judgment and condemnation. And I chose to love him anyway. Not because what he did was excusable, it wasn't, but because I believe in the possibility of redemption. Because I believe that people are more than the worst thing they've ever done.
because I believe that at 68 years old, I deserve to be happy, and Earl makes me happy. The sun rises and sets over Lone Star Senior Living. The seasons change. The brutal Texas summer gives way to brief autumn, then mild winter, then spring wildflowers. Life goes on, as it always does, and we go on with it, making the most of whatever time we have left. This is our story, mine and Earl's and Rose's. 3 lives connected across 4 decades by tragedy and secrets, and finally, truth. It's not the story I expected to be living at this stage of my life, but it's the story I have, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. Because sometimes the most meaningful relationships are the ones that force us to confront difficult truths about ourselves, about others, and about what we're willing to forgive and accept. Sometimes love means seeing someone fully, their past, their mistakes, their guilt, their attempts at redemption, and choosing them anyway. Earl Ray Thompson is imperfect and flawed and carrying burdens that will never fully go away, but he's also kind and honest and brave and trying every day to be better than he was. And I, Wanda June Hartwell, at 68 years old, have decided that's enough, that he's enough, that we're enough. The story doesn't end happily ever after because real life doesn't work that way, but it ends with hope, with healing, with the possibility of redemption, and with 2 imperfect people who found each other and chose love despite everything that should have kept them apart. And maybe in the end, that's the most honest kind of happy ending there is.